Well, hey, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of The Boundless Show. Lisa Anderson here with you, and as I often like to do, a little preview of what's coming up. For our inbox, we have a listener who's wondering, what are some good habits to establish before getting married? Okay, well, that's a good question. Shouldn't we all be establishing good habits, marriage or not? So one of our counselors is going to weigh in on that. And then for our culture, we have Paul Angoni back for part 2 of our conversation about lies young adults believe. And so we're going to talk today about lies about technology, nostalgia, and looking back, and why more information doesn't make us necessarily better informed. So that's coming up later. But here we are for our roundtable and a conversation about real relationships in the age of COVID. So we have got Peter, Laura, and Bill here. Hey, guys.
Hey, Lisa.
Woot, woot. All right. Well, this is interesting because our blogger, Suzanne Goslin, talked about this not too long ago, this phenomenon of the fact that we specifically have let kind of those acquaintances / moderate friendships drop. Like, I don't think many of us will say, my best friend and I haven't talked in a year. I mean, it's not, you're going to keep up with family members, besties, all that kind of stuff. But there are just a whole category and class of friendships that have kind of like petered out, or we've left them, or even acquaintances. Like I felt like Suzanne in her article talked about, you know, for years she frequented a coffee shop to do her writing. And it was usually like 1 or 2 days a week that she would sit there and work. And now she went back after COVID and none of the same employees are there. And she felt like these people just disappeared out of her life and she was sad. It was like a loss, you know, and she hadn't thought about how that would affect her. And so I think we're going to have a good conversation around this. And I want to kick it off by saying, what would you say, like, look back on the previous year, when you think of the relationships you've had, what are some of the biggest adjustments you've had to make? And did they take you by surprise, or were you kind of like, did you ease into them? What did that look like as far as the relational component for you? Introvert or extrovert, you can even bring that into it.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely an extrovert, and I'm very much I want to interact with the people that I want to be around. That, like, instead of like texting is not my thing. So COVID really actually helped me do a lot better at that. Of like, I can't be the guy that responds 72 hours later and be like, oh, nothing happened. So it was really good for me to actually be intentional with responding via text specifically.
Yeah, I'd say for myself, I kind of have a unique perspective because I've lived in a couple different time zones in the past couple of years. Lived on the West Coast, lived on the East Coast, and now I'm in the middle in Colorado. So I have a lot of long-distance friendships that I've tried to keep up or had to work through even before COVID hit. But that just kind of perpetuated the need to be intentional, like you're saying, Laura, and reach out to people through texting or on social media, even just like commenting on their posts and having those little connection points instead of, it's hard to be intentional and keeping really close with a ton of different people. So having those even small connection points online, there are ways to do that. You just have to be creative.
I would say I'm the exact opposite of Laura. I'm the introvert, and 72 hours is acceptable. It's like I'm still here. but I have found out that I need to be more intentional, and that involves just reaching out and starting some new friendships online as well. Maybe somebody had been acquaintances with, but really taking that relationship deeper and really building that friendship.
Yeah, that's good. What would you say? I mean, it's hard to think of like quarantine and, you know, sequestering and COVID and all this kind of stuff as being good for relationships. I think we can think of the bad things, but is there anything that you were forced to improve in how you relate to other people because of COVID and being in lockdown or having to socially distance?
I would say so. Just for background, John, who's producing the program, he and I have really worked on the friendship over the past few months. And for me, it was being very intentional to say, this is the time I have to set that and keep that. And he's been very flexible, but it's been setting up online meetings and just doing what you normally do in person, but being a little bit more intentional about, hey, I have to do this and put a little more into it because we don't have that face-to-face, the contact you'd normally have, like at a coffee shop or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think with that, being intentional with, setting up those times or even those phone calls, like maybe not in person, maybe you don't have that opportunity, but there are people that I would normally run into and just having to choose other ways to connect, whether it was FaceTime, whether it was a phone call. I would say I also spent a couple weeks with my sister and her family and her kids and her husband. And so that was definitely a chance for me to connect more with them because there are 5 kids. So that was really fun because I got to work and be there at the same time. So those were relationships I definitely was able to build deeper.
Yeah, I think over the past year, most everyone has struggled in some way or fashion. And so I think I was challenged, and I have been challenged over the past year of how can I pray for my friends and how can I pray for my acquaintances, and just being intentional and asking those questions and having conversations as they open up, or as people are willing to open up to you. I think that's a great way to kind of stay in touch and stay connected.
And Lisa, to add one other thing, I joked about being an introvert, which I am, but I had to come to a place where I realized I need people. Just for me as a person, I need that input of people speaking into my life in different ways to keep me fresh, to keep me aware of things spiritually. And that was a big realization for me, is I need people.
Yeah. I think one good thing that happened for me is I was forced, again, because we couldn't do inside gatherings and stuff, some of my friendships and connections I took outside. So I ended up, especially through the summer and into the fall, doing more hiking. And so it would be on a weekend or an evening, grabbing a couple friends and saying, you willing to go outside? And that has all kinds of benefits. So that was really cool to kind of be forced into that rather than let's go to a restaurant and eat 12,000 calories and talk. Let's actually go hike. And so that was a kind of a weird side benefit of that. I would say, and I wanted to get your take on this, something that was a little bit of a struggle was negotiating the different perspectives on social distancing or masks and having to kind of have those conversations, which could get tricky. So I would say I had a couple closer friends that I ended up not spending a lot of time with because they were very COVID hesitant or very didn't want to do a lot of anything and stuff. And so then it was oh, okay, well, that's going to be hard. How do I reach out to them instead? Did you have any conversations that you had to have that were hard around stuff like that, of even in group friendships, of how you negotiate what you're going to do, what you're not going to do?
Yeah, conversations and realization of that same thing, Lisa, that I don't think any time before has people's views on things been so polarizing where, one side, they won't see you in person at all, and one side, they won't wear a mask at all. And, trying to navigate each relationship and really prioritizing, if I really want to be in a relationship with this person and they don't want to see me in person, then I'll FaceTime them or whatever. Or the opposite of if they want to go out, or if I'm not as comfortable as they are, what does that look like? And what situations can I put myself in? How can I hang out with people in a way that, is respectful towards them and also is respectful towards my own position? That's been a challenge. And there's been some conversations that I've had to have with friends and family about that.
Yeah. I want to circle back to something that Bill said. Bill, you talking about, realizing kind of that you have relational needs and you need people and you can't just be a lone ranger. And it's very easy to kind of slip into patterns or habits that allow us to pull away or whatever. What would you say you guys learned about your relational needs or about friendship? What, in the past year, what really was brought to the surface that you're even if this pandemic ever ends, what am I going to carry forward as just great tools and great things, lessons learned out of it?
Yeah, I would say just kind of what we were just talking about of just being more intentional about thinking about the needs of the other person as a whole. Because, yeah, it did feel like every conversation or any time that there was more effort being put in, because it was like, okay, I have to actually ask them what they think about this. I want to respect them, but I know where I land. And so overall, it was just a good reminder to think well of others and to be intentional about seeking their needs.
Yeah, I would say the same thing, is that my wife in March and April of 2020 had an undiagnosed case of COVID. We just didn't have the testing. So that kind of tempered my attitude on some things with going, okay, I need to respect others where they are on this, and learning that it's okay to bump elbows or, do the fist bump or things. It was awkward for me. I like to shake hands or just, have that physical connection. But it was learning about others' needs and learning just because they want to keep their distance, that's not personal. That's not toward me. I mean, they're protecting themselves and their families. So it was more of realizing people's needs and to take that on a case-by-case basis and go, yeah, I get that, and I want to respect you for it.
Yeah, I think one thing that I noticed or learned was how prior to COVID, I had relied so much on the casual acquaintances or just being around people and calling that relationship or calling that friendship. So, we know that you can be lonely in a crowd, but this idea of me being pretty much a borderline extrovert, I could go to things, whether it was church or whether it was an event or a party or whatever, and feel like I'd done relationships when really I hadn't. I'd just been in a crowd and talked to a bunch of people, but not really gone anywhere with it. So I think for me, I want to carry forward the idea of focusing on the difference between having just casual encounters and like, hey, what's up, whatever, whether that's coffee shops or general friend groups, versus am I really gaining some traction in this friendship? Mm-hmm. Am I giving? Am I receiving? Am I growing? And thinking, again, using the intentionality word, thinking more intentionally about that. I think that'd be a good learning.
I think with that, for me, there's a lot of times that like people will just come to mind, whether it's a song or something that I saw, just so many different times where different people will come up, or whether it's just the Holy Spirit. So I think for me, it's been really good, since I don't get to interact with people as much, of just shooting them a text or just calling them randomly and actually following through on those times where I'm reminded of someone, whether it's just to say hi or whether it's, what's going on and let's catch up. So there have been some really fruitful experiences that I've had because I followed through, instead of just being like, oh yeah, I thought of that person, great, but actually in light of all that's going on, saying, no, like I'm actually going to make that effort to say something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say one thing it taught me, kind of going back to previous comments, is just compassion for others, and realizing I can't just barricade into their lives and, hey, what's going on? But really do need to see them compassionately. And that's really where spiritually this whole epidemic has hit me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just priorities of how much of friendship you need and how much community you need, and how much alone time you need. And then prioritizing even who those people are and who you're allowing to speak into your life, and who you're reaching out to, and all of that. Prioritizing all those things is something that I needed to figure out anyways, but I think COVID has helped that along in some ways.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because I think there's a difference between needing alone time and needing to get away and refresh, and just using that as a crutch to be lazy or an isolationist or not into other people. I mean, it's very easy to do when you've worked a hard day and then you're like, I am literally just going to sit in front of Netflix. I do not want to deal with people. I don't want to go, and it's like recognizing like, okay, where's this being sourced out of? What does that look like? So kind of as we finish out here, I want to get your ideas. We've touched on some of these, but think through more ideas for different levels of friendships. So think maybe the acquaintances, the kind of like average circle type person, the inner circle, and then best friends and family. What are tips that you would give listeners for going after prioritizing, to use Peter's term, relationship with those different levels of people? It could look, and one thing that just, I'll kick us off, one thing that comes to mind is it's easy to think that I'm being technologically savvy by taking every app there is, every delivery service, every opportunity. And I'm like, I could spend the next 10 years of my life never having contact with people with all the things that are available to me. So what is it like? I've talked often about my elderly neighbor who just needs a lot of help, with things. And I love doing it. She's a friend. And I'm like, yeah, maybe I don't need to get groceries delivered or whatever. Maybe I need to take my friend and just the two of us are going to go and do a little bit of shopping and be careful about it, but have conversation, make it a little social outing that's also productive. But we're going to do that instead of just relying on Prime or relying on random whatever delivery service. So I don't know. I've just been thinking that through.
Yeah, I think, it changes for each relationship you have with each person, and where that even came from. I think a cool thing that I did at the beginning of COVID almost a year ago was, people in one friend group kind of from college. I just sent out a huge group text and we're like, hey, I'm going to do a Zoom meeting. Like, you guys all come together and share what's going on in your life. And that was really cool. It's a great connection point. So even if it's just those things where maybe I don't have an intentional relationship with each individual person, but, you can kind of do group online things, that works well. And then, people that are closer and depending geographically too, and depending on your stance on COVID or where you live, but going outside and like you were talking about, Lisa, going on hikes and runs and all of that, going to the grocery store, doing those things in person as you can is great, and having the intentional phone conversations too with the close people and the moderately close people too.
Mm-hmm.
For me, Lisa, a couple of things really jumped out. One is that just asking, hey, is God bringing this person into my life for my need or their need? I need to really be sensitive to what God's doing there. And the other is just staying invested in good friends. The pandemic really shouldn't change that. It throws challenges our way, but we still need to invest in those and then be open to who God might be bringing in our path. He might be trying to grow me or grow that other person, and just being prayerful about that.
Yeah, I think knowing where people are at and how they feel about it, like we talked about earlier, is a really big, important piece of it. And then based on that, maybe it is, having people over for tacos or, deciding who you want to be around you. But also, making every effort to be intentional outside of that too. Yeah, maybe it is going to the grocery store and still smiling with your eyes at people instead of just like trying to make the least contact possible. Like, I think there are ways that we can just in our everyday, even when we're walking outside, especially like what Peter was saying of finding places and times to be outside and to be a part of. That's like, for me, that's where it's at. Like, I love being outside. And so there's a lot of times where I am on a hike or snowboarding or just all these different things but getting to bring different people that I maybe typically wouldn't have done that with alongside me.
Yeah. It's like, I just so love spring and summer. And I think heading into now better weather, sorry, Australia. But, hopefully you've been doing this. Just realizing stuff can be spontaneous too. We often so over, construct everything. Afterward, ping a few friends and just say, grab some food on your way home from work and let's meet at a park and just catch up and talk about our days, or do, and it's like, if you can show up, whatever. And it doesn't have to be a big to do, but you can do. I feel like when I'm out running errands, I have my mask on and I just move like this drone. Like, I don't want to make eye contact with people because, you can't really engage and then it's weird. And I've got 4 more stores I have to go in with this mask. But it's like, when I can stop, when I'm outside a store, I like to just, I stand 6 feet away from someone. I take my mask off and I smile at them and I say hello. And I just trust God that I will not give or get COVID in that moment. I'm hopeful. So anyway, these are all great ideas, you guys. And I so appreciate you weighing in with this. And again, as we move forward, trust God in the process, are kind and careful with people, I think we'll be able to make some great gains. So thanks for your input.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
A single precious, a single precious is
Well, folks, we are here for this week's Culture segment, which is a continuation of last week's conversation with Paul Angoni about his book, 25 Lies 20-Somethings Need to Stop Believing. And so welcome back, Paul.
Thanks for having me back.
Well, super cool. I mentioned last week, we were talking a lot about everything from, I'm the only one struggling to, this idea of like, oh, well, what if I make all the wrong choices now? How's this going to derail my future? And today we're going to tackle a couple more of the lies that you put in the book. And so one is this idea that we either are completely informed and connected or that for some reason we just have to be. And there's a little bit of PTSD in this for me because I had a season where I was a journalist and I worked in Washington, D.C. And I worked with people who, because this was the political landscape of the paper I was at, who could easily just bring up random politicians and conspiracy theories from like the 50s and 60s that I had no idea what they were talking about. But I just looked like an idiot because they were talking about like these people were their uncles or something. And I'm like, what? And it just helped me realize maybe I'm not as into this as I kind of thought I was. Maybe I just wanted to like wear suits and walk around the Capitol. But it was a weird spot for me because I felt like I was so knowledgeable about stuff, but you can always compare yourself to someone who knows just a little bit more or is in on the latest thing. Or talk to us about where for the young adult today this is really manifesting itself.
Yeah, well, I think it's manifesting in our pocket with our iPhone and just how connected I think we all are with our smartphone. And just all the updates, all the things that we're getting, all the social media, all the apps, everything. I mean, it's just this constant alert that we're either touching, or we're wearing. Maybe it's on our watch, and it's this need. It's really an addiction, and studies are showing that more and more that it's an addiction, and that we're so addicted to being constantly connected to our phone, constantly informed, constantly updated, and all these apps that are shooting at us the latest headlines and really the latest grenades, in a sense, the latest things that are going to blow up everything. Here's how everything's ending. It's usually very heightened, very dramatic, very stark, because that's how they're getting your attention. But yet we're addicted to it. And I really go after this lie, and I call it obsessive connection disorder. I'm not making light of obsessive compulsive disorder, but I'm in a sense, we are so compulsive to be connected all the time. And it really is this obsession. And what is that doing to our mental health? What is that doing to our anxiety levels, our self-esteem? What's that doing to actually our information? If we're constantly going to what I call infotainment. This really, it's made to catch your eye. It's made to be entertaining. It's made to get a click. Is it really made to present truth? Is it really made to present a well-reasoned argument? Not that some journalists or some people on Twitter or Facebook aren't doing that, but I think we can all say, and especially after the climate we've been in with political unrest and all that, that what is this doing to us? How well-informed are we? Or is technology dictating our education? Is the tool of technology really dictating our knowledge? Or are we seeking out knowledge, seeking out wisdom that we can then apply rightly to our life and in our families?
Yeah. Well, and it just strikes me how it's just making us freak out about stuff because, like, take, for example, the COVID vaccine. I mean, if this had happened 50 years ago, you would just get the vaccine because your doctor tells you to and you just trust him and you're just whatever. But now everyone's got their independent sources about everything. And then they're like, not only can they just like have their own opinion about it and be like, no, I'm not going to do it or I'm going to wait on it. But then it's like, and here's why you need to think exactly how I do. And it's just, and then we're mad at each other because someone's judging so-and-so and we get all crazy about it. And it just seems to me that it's become kind of this black hole of like, do you know enough? Do you know the right things? Do you have the sources for the right things? And in light of that, are you influencing enough people to think the way that you think? And it kind of made me think of a conversation I had with a friend the other night who was lamenting the fact that she couldn't add more. And she's not super like on social media. So sometimes I envy her. And she was like, yeah, I just can't like fit any more people into my life. And I'm like thinking, you've got like 3 good friends. And I'm like thinking of me in comparison, who I'm keeping all these plates spinning. And I'm like, that's probably not any better, because really, what's the depth of all these multitudinous connection points that I have?
Yeah. And I think we're all feeling the strain of that. I think we're all feeling the weight of it. And I think we're all wondering, is there a healthier way out there? And am I addicted? I think we all have to ask ourselves that. Like, how stark is my addiction? How much time? You can put the setting on your phone. They're trying to do some things now to let you know how addicted you are to the technology they're selling you. And they're doing that because, there's been articles and research and even, Apple's two biggest investors, and I talk about this in the book, they came out and said, hey, Apple, we got to do things to help young people fight the addiction to the thing we've created. And if you've watched, documentaries like Social Dilemma or some different documentaries, basically a lot of people that were on the front end of creating a lot of these services, these apps, these technologies, are all now feeling very guilty and very worried about what they helped start and what is it now doing. And we've been talking about things like filter bubbles for a while. It was popular TED Talk. Basically how the internet is creating filter bubbles, that it's only showing you things that you want to see based off your preferences, based off your search history. They know you better than you know yourself. So it's only showing you arguments and people that you agree with. So different than, going to the town hall, hearing the political debate, having an open mind, hearing the 2 candidates without any sense of what you were supposed to believe, but just thinking through it. How different is that now? And so that obsessive connection disorder that I go after in this book, I think it's a really important one. I think it's something we got to keep talking about. And I do think it's having some really negative effects with everything, with our self-image, with our anxiety, our depression. Again, the stats are there, and there's going to be more and more stats coming out with this addiction. I need to be so informed. I need to be so instantly connected. That we really have no foundation, no base, no well that we're drawing from in that space.
Well, and it's it's so interesting because it's almost prompting some of the big creators and companies to have a knee-jerk reaction of like, okay, well, now we just got to do away with this. I just read this morning that the big 3, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, are thinking of completely pulling back on the amount of political content that they even allow. And so now it's like, so what? They're going to get to decide. So then you get all angsty about that. Which is an interesting prospect, but it is true because we have who was it? It was again I think it was a YouTuber who. Oh no, it was a professor that I was reading about. Because I'm overly informed. I'm like, where did I read that? I don't know. It was probably one of the 50 random news articles I scrolled through today. Who was talking about one of his assignments that he gives in his class is for everyone to put everything away, all their devices, and for 30 minutes they have to have a conversation with someone next to them, and how difficult that is. And this is in a university somewhere. And I was just so shocked by that. And so my reaction to that, Paul, as the oldster that I am becoming, though I'm still young at heart, people, let's be honest here, is this idea of driving to one of the other lies that you talk about, and that's nostalgia in the book. And, for me, I was like, what in the world? What can a 20-something be looking back on in a reflective, kind of longing kind of way? But I guess it's true because, I obviously can see very clear distinctions of, my childhood versus where we are now. But you're saying that even, the frenetic pace that a young adult is living at, they're kind of wistful for previous days too. And you even reference, I think it was 500 Days of Summer, the movie that really kind of, talk about how you or why you selected that as an example.
Yeah. If anybody's seen 500 Days of Summer, it's great. And it's a great perspective on relationships. The whole movie's about a dating relationship. And there's some classic scenes after they break up where he's going back and he's having all this nostalgia about the memories they spent together, how amazing it was, how in love they were, all these things that we all do, I think, after a breakup. Whether you've been dumped or you did the dumping, at some point it's like, oh man, should I go back? And so he's struggling with that, wanting to go back. And then later down the line, during the movie towards the end, he goes back through those memories. It was actually his younger sister says, I want you to go back and I want you to look again. So they have him go back, and then they show the whole clip. So instead of him reaching out his hand and grabbing her hand like he remembered, now he's remembering that she pulled her hand away. Or now he's remembering the argument that they had. Or now he's remembering that she was crying at the movie. When they're watching The Graduate and they're watching this wedding scene, she's bawling. And he's thinking now, like, maybe that was a sign that she didn't want to marry me. And so nostalgia was really blinding him to something that wasn't really true. And I feel like that happens to us when we're in hard situations, when we're in hard seasons, times, we have a tendency to look back. And I want to go back to that time when everything was good, when everything was right, when everything was perfect. And I guess my point I don't think nostalgia in a sense is necessarily bad. Like having good memories, having perspective, having those times is fine. But it's the lie of there wasn't any problems then. Well, you had problems. You had struggles. You were going through things. Even in middle school or high school or college, those times we might look back and say everything was perfect. Nah, you were insecure and you were depressed and you were struggling through stuff. And so I think we need to, we lose our future and our present perspective when we're always thinking about the past and how do I get back there. And then that's why, a lot of people, they end up getting back into another bad relationship, or they go back to the bad relationship because at least it was comfortable. At least I know it. Versus now where I feel like everything's changing. There's so much transition and I don't know where to stand. So even if I feel miserable, I just want to get back to some place that feels comfortable. Yeah. And so that can become the problem of wishing you could go back.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's weird because it seems like all of us trend towards one extreme of either trying to live in the past or the glory days or the what ifs, or we're so into the future of like, well, I'm going to be this and this is what, it's like we're just not enjoying where we are. And so the present day is just spent looking at everyone else's lives and their stories through social or whatever. And again, we're not really experiencing the time that we're in, which is a bummer. I like one of the suggestions that you give, and you actually give some of your own examples here. You talk about, and this is for staying informed, but also I think just for slowing our pace down and being okay with like cultivating our minds in healthier ways. You actually recommend reading great books and going after, like, we always talk about, this is again one of those other things you always read about like the greats, like a Warren Buffett, who are like have built these empires and stuff. And then they say, I read 25 papers a day and I've, read all these books and amazing leadership stuff. But there are some really good ones to go after. And what would you say, Paul, like if you could throw out a couple classics that you think are just great for developing the mind and helping someone be a well-rounded person, what would you put out there?
Yeah, I've put a list out there. I think it's 27 books 20-something should read or something on the interwebs. I just keep collecting these books. One of them that some of the classics for me are like Man's Search for Meaning. That's become a popular one. Viktor Frankl, basically his perspective of going through concentration camps in the 40s and how he came out of that. And what he learned from that experience. For anybody that's struggling with a sense of lost hope or lost purpose, I think that's a really important one. Another one that I write about, which is another classic story, is The Hiding Place, about the Ten Booms, Corrie Ten Boom. And I talk about this in the book. It taught me so much, and it had this lie of, I think there's this lie of nothing good will come out of this. And I think we're experiencing this now. Like what good can come out of COVID, or what good can come out of tragedy? And in that book, and I'll quickly tell the story, but basically the Ten Booms are also in a concentration camp, and they're in a dorm with all these other women, and there's fleas everywhere. And Corrie Ten Boom's sister was trying to practice the practice of being thankful. So thankful for everything, thankful that we're here together as sisters, and she's going down the list and thanking that, thank you even for the fleas. And Corrie Ten Boom's like, no, I can't. Like, that's it for me. Like, your faith's better than mine, but I will not thank God for these fleas. Because every time they lay down in bed, they'd just be bitten by fleas all the time. So a month later, they're doing these Bible services in their dorms. And all these women with all different dialects from different countries are all coming together. And they're translating the Bible. I mean, it's rippling throughout the whole room. And no guards will come in, and no guards are stopping them from these Bible services. So basically, they're able to preach the good news and lead people to Christ. And so full of life in their dorm, they don't understand, like, they God's protecting them. So then they figure out, later on, they talk to one of the guards, and the guard's like, none of the guards will come into your guys' dorms because it has the worst fleas. So the fleas were creating this force field around the camp. So there was good coming out of that piece. And sometimes, again, we don't have that perspective. So again, these books, I love history, and I love these kind of books because I think it gives us this perspective. It gives us these stories. It gives, again, these things of, wow, this person was struggling. This person was going through something really hard. And here's how God brought them through it. Here's what they learned from it. Here's how God was faithful. And man, we really lose that if our main sense of information is coming from the internet. And again, as you're reading a book, I was reading Thomas Merton, No Man is an Island. He's a monk, one of my favorites too. Just reading those books, just so much wisdom. And again, it was just such a profound realization. I was having the kind of a quiet retreat reading this book. It was just this realization of he was giving me wisdom answers that I was not searching for in a browser. I didn't go and tell me the answer to living a good life and getting the search results that were tailored towards my own biases. Thomas Merton was presenting arguments to me of wisdom. And then I had to wrestle with that and think about that. And it is such an important concept, and it's becoming more and more radical. But again, it gives us a foundation to build off of.
Yeah. So if you were to sit down, Paul, with someone, say one of our listeners who's just like, okay, we're now, we're in a new year. Let's all agree we just had to, write off 2020 because of whatever. But I really want to do this year differently. And I want to have more hope. And I want to live, in the moment and be hopeful for the future. And I want, I feel like I'm so tethered to technology and stuff. Do you have any just steps, next step forward that you would recommend for folks to just say, because maybe just a couple easy wins and then something looking ahead to the whole year that you'd recommend for them?
Yeah. In the book, even though it's about lies, it's really about trying to get to truth and next steps. So each chapter in the book, I literally have next steps, exactly what you just said. So it's not just, oh, that's a lie. Oh, great. I'm terrible.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Now I'm more
be sad
depressed.
about it. Yeah.
It's like, no, here's some next steps. Here's some things we can do. Here's ways we can start chipping away at this. There's lots of different ways. One, obviously have some, if you feel you're alone in this, you feel like you're struggling, you find that community if you can. Be the friend that's willing to reach out and be vulnerable and talk to two friends and just say, hey, can we meet on Zoom? Can we meet on the phone? Can we meet for coffee if that's allowed in our state? To just really talk. Because again, that's giving you a foundation. That's giving you a grounding. If you're having struggle with the phone, we got to find some habits and practices to put down our phone. So whatever that is, whether that's like you said, 30 minutes of silence, of putting away your device, whether that's putting on the setting on your phone so you know how much time you're spending. You can put apps where you can only spend a certain amount of time on your app. Some of those tools could be helpful. Or it could be, I need a fast. You see a lot of people doing this now and more. I'm going to fast from social media. I'm going to go off of it for a certain period of time.
Yep.
And then also, just some small things like, okay, I'm feeling the pull. I'm feeling the pull to my phone. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling depressed. Okay, I got to stop myself. Let me realize that. And let me go on a walk. Let me go on a hike. Let me go pray. Let me go find some silence to sit in and see what happens. Yeah. And I think for our culture especially, it's such a noisy world. I think back to the Grinch saying, oh, the noise. And I think it's only gotten noisier. So it could even be just turn the radio off in your car if you're driving.
Yeah.
Whatever thing you can do to practice some of those age-old truths. This is nothing new, but it's so important. And I bring up the example in the book on that step of Mr. Fred Rogers. And I won't tell his whole story. We've become more popular with the movie and everything. But really, that was his whole practice. And I was watching him on an interview with Charlie Rose, who is a famous interviewer, and he was really amazed at Fred Rogers. And he was telling Fred, you're the most peaceful person I know. And Mr. Rogers was basically asking Charlie Rose, how do we, in our television profession, how do we promote silence and reflection? And that's what he was trying to do in his show. That's why he talked so slow, and he would have pauses. And anybody who knows the TV is, dead silence. That's the worst. But he promoted that because even through the element of TV, he was trying to promote reflection and silence for kids to be able to think and wrestle with something. And in a sense, then, he was also a very grounded person and peaceful. Yeah. So, we could go through a whole list.
Yeah.
But those
well,
are some
you
to
actually
start.
Do. I was going to say, really it made me think like you actually have some pretty good, what you call healthy declarations at the end of the book that are just good exercises for people to walk through, and not every one of them is going to hit a nerve or be like, oh, this is the one I have to focus on. But it really is kind of drawing a line in the sand and saying, because for me, I would love to sit back and be all prideful and think like, okay, well, now I've really arrived in all my maturity and I don't struggle with any of these weird things. But I had one of my things for this year was to have completely social media free Sundays because I am addicted to social media. I'm addicted to notifications on my phone, which I don't even have on my phone, but I go into the apps to like look and see what notifications I have.
Too.
So how messed up is that? When you talked about our inability to even watch a sitcom without multitasking, like our attention spans are that bad.
Yeah.
That was very depressing. So it's just like, how do I, and I feel like that for me alone will tackle both social media and separating and making a Sabbath for myself. So it's going to be that distinction that I need. And everyone kind of has their thing, like you said, that they can do and that they can move forward in. And I think these declarations are a good way to go about that too.
I end the book, I go through the 25 lies, and then I end the book with some declarations. And then I basically end the book with a prayer. And here's my prayer for you. And I just go through a list. Because that really is my heart for the book. It's going after despair and hopelessness and fear and just everything that I feel like we've been just so smothered with. And I think we all could just use a good dose of hope and encouragement and inspiration, and not a fake kind, but an intentional kind. And that's my hope with the book, is to say, hey, we've all been on that ledge to some extent. And I start the book with a ledge story, an actual ledge story where my neighbor's out on a ledge and for 4 hours I'm there talking to them. And I tell that story in the book to start it because that's what it feels like to me. I mean, it feels that stark to me and that real. And we've all been there, whether maybe it's not physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And so we all need to say, hey, we're all in this together. How do we move forward, and how do we be intentional about it? Because it's not going to just happen. Again, you don't become the magician by magic. And you don't start moving towards some healthy habits by magic. You humble yourself, you ask good questions, you say, okay, who can help me along this journey? And how do I move forward in this, and pray a lot through it. And then hopefully we can start forming some new habits towards better health in 2021.
Yeah, that's good. And I think that, this is where I would say that you, the listener, have a leg up on some of us who are older, because you are still naturally more teachable, more humble, more interested in, I'm always so jazzed whenever I get interns in who are just like, I've done like 4 internships. They're just always, and some of it is just like, they're trying to succeed and whatever, but there's also just that ability to say, I just want to learn. I just want to be part of this. I just want to. And so you guys, if you still have that, cling on to that and be excited about where you are, because there's a lot ahead of you, and it doesn't all have to be, like Paul said, exciting or sexy. It will not be. So be okay with that. But know that there's a good future ahead of you, mostly because God has your future. And so, Paul, thank you so much. The book, you guys, is 25 Lies 20-somethings Need to Stop Believing. We've been talking to Paul today, and of course, we'll have all, you guys have his info, his info, but we're making it available yet again, so that you can get more of this info again, now that we're in a new year. And, what else are you doing during COVID? So just go after it. So, Paul, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me on.
On that cross of Calvary, every burden's been defeated, every wretched heart redeemed. You drown our sin in seas of crimson. Every wretched heart redeemed. You drown our sin in seas. Hallelujah.
Well, hey, everyone. We are finishing out this week's show with our inbox and have counselor Jenny Coffey in. Hey, Jenny.
Hello.
Good to have you.
Thank you.
Well, here we go. You're going to answer this week's question. Our listener says, what are some good habits to establish early on for a healthy marriage? While none of us are perfect and we all have areas we can improve in, what would you say are essential areas we need to be growing in? And what are some non-essential ones?
So I'm going to kind of speak from two different time frames because I think, as we know, most millennials and Gen Zers are getting married a little bit later. And then you've got, it seems to be kind of the two sides of the spectrum. You still got, especially among Christians, a lot of people that are still getting married young. And then you've got people that are pushing it off a little bit. And so what we tend to see is that people that get married a little bit older, either in their early 30s or beyond, there tends to be more of a difficulty of merging the two lives together because they've been living independently and singly for so long that it's kind of like I kind of got my groove in the way that I do things, and now I got to switch that up. So when it comes to getting married older, I think one of the best things that they can work on doing is kind of that biblical leave and cleave mindset. And this seems to be especially hard for people that tend to live close to family. So if they're close by, they kind of just continue on with those patterns of, well, we go over to mom and dad's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Thursday at brunch. And so there's not that ability in that time to kind of create that identity as a husband and wife. And that can be so foundationally important, both for younger marrieds and then those that get married a little bit older. Creating that identity as husband and wife is super important. And I think that that's somewhat of an ambiguous type of thing. Like, what does that even look like? But it's really that idea of how do you make sure that you're making your spouse your person? So somebody was probably your person before, and you're needing to shift that. Now, that can go the other way, where you want to make sure that you're not cutting off friendships, cutting off all of other support systems, and you guys kind of turtle into yourselves, and it's just the two of you against the world. So make sure you are maintaining those same-sex friendships, because your spouse can't do that for you. They can't be that, for a woman, you're not going to get probably the emotion from your husband that you want, that you can get from a girlfriend. So maintaining those friendships and those relationships within the confines of that new identity as a wife is really important, especially when you're saying things like needing support from somebody, but not making sure you're putting your spouse on blast, like they're not your boyfriend anymore. Be very careful to protect the marriage, but also using that as a support system, I think is really important. All of this stuff can kind of be pushed to an extreme. You can take any of these things as good things and they can be bad, right? The leave and cleave, you can kind of hole into yourselves. That can be a negative. You can have the friendships where you either tend to lean one or both ways of heavily investing in a friendship and forgetting your spouse, or forgetting all friendships and only thinking about your spouse. So it's really a matter of healthy boundaries all the way around, but there has to be foundationally that reestablishing of identity as husband and wife. What does this look like? How do we move forward in that in a healthy way? And then kind of continue on in life as usual, in a sense, keeping everything under that umbrella of now you're married.
Yeah, that's good. Also, just a couple thoughts, or something I'd like you to address is I hear from a lot of folks who get into marriage who realize pretty early on that maybe they didn't quite have the communication and conflict skills that they needed. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, so I am a stuffer, or I am a stonewaller, or I am... Is there, short of them just being able to read a book on this, learn how to do this better, how can they start practicing that, or even establishing kind of where their unhealthy patterns are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, without a shadow of a doubt, if a couple is not doing premarital before they get married, that is, statistically, they found out that there's a 33% less likely chance of you getting divorced if you do 4 premarital counseling sessions. Just 4. I mean, 33%. That's huge. And this was a secular study. So it's really interesting. It's finally getting traction amongst everybody. But I think a lot of newlyweds get nervous about therapy. Oh, well, we've only been married 6 months. We shouldn't have to be in therapy already. But really what I tell people, kind of, it's a blunt thing, but it's true. If you haven't been able to figure it out so far, it's unlikely you're going to somehow magically unless the Lord literally comes down himself and figures out how to do this, it's unlikely that you're going to suddenly create the patterns and the things that you need to do. And so, yes, there's tons of wonderful books out there. We have so many on our website. Boundaries in Marriage is great, as well as the 9 Lies book that we just published about how certain lies in your marriage can destroy communication and conflict resolution skills. But if you're reading that and finding, I need someone to help me process this, therapy is one of the best things you can do. And typically what it is it's not that these people can't figure it out. It's not that you're dumb. There's nothing wrong with you, but there's so many childhood triggers and wounds that tend to come out, and marriage brings those out.
Yeah.
And if it's hard to be able to manage those on your own without kind of a mediator there to help you walk through it.
Yeah, that's good. Well, we will make sure we get those resources on our site available to you, and you can go to focusonthefamily.com and even learn more about the advice and the resources that our counselors have for you. You can just click on the applicable links there, which we will also make available. So, Jenny, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, folks. Well, that is it for this week's show, and we would love to see you around the site and beyond. Make sure that you're weighing in on our social and elsewhere. Find us there throughout the week as we have conversations around these issues. Otherwise, I'll see you around next week. I'm Lisa Anderson for The Boundless Show.
The Boundless Show is a production of Boundless.org. Focus on the family.